In this session, I want to talk about the power of no when it comes to boundary setting. Boundary setting is probably one of the superpowers that you can develop as a leader. And what I've found in my own journey and the journey of coaching and helping leaders perform at their best is that so many people, leaders specifically, have a big problem with no when it comes to boundary setting. No is one of the most powerful words that you can give as a leader. It's actually part of self-discipline and self-love, because what happens is you don't let other people's problems become your problems. You can say no to things that don't amplify or progress you on your mission. You can equally give people no and consequence of the no. And if you think about this, if you're a leader who can't say no to customers, clients, opportunities, projects, you're forever going to be scattered and blowing your attention into multiple directions and never having the force or the potency to move forwards. In this session, we're going to go into the value of no and what it can do for you. Let's first look at what happens if you can't say no as a leader and if you've got no boundaries. So I realized this probably about 9 years ago when I was leading my team, and I would pacify their emotions, not say no to them because I didn't want to seem like the bad guy. I would not give consequence when they broke or pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable in my workplace. And I would not communicate the boundaries that I had. So people would walk all over me. Things like I would give my time away to clients to book them in my calendar, and they wouldn't show up for appointments. And I would go home late, which would cause problems with my wife at the time. And this led to so many problems. I was resentful, angry, and rageful deep down, yet I would lead with what I would call a clenched jaw smile and live in this place where I was out of integrity. I was very inauthentic. I seemed like this happy, jokey, smiley guy, but deep down there was so much frustration. And the problem was that it was like a slow drip of poison. It wasn't one specific thing that was making me angry, but it was all these little marks, like death by 1,000 cuts, that one day I walked into the gym and the lights had just been left on overnight, which was a small cost. Well, wasn't a small cost, but it was it was one of those things, like such a careless mistake, and I blew my top. I wasn't angry at the lights. It was all of the things that I had been building up over the last couple of months or years got thrown into that conversation. So my team got this really angry, rageful, shouty leader in a team meeting. And then I felt so shameful. I felt so bad. And I seemed like the bad guy. And this is what I feel so many leaders struggle with, because they haven't got that ability to say no. They haven't got that ability to put a boundary in place and uphold it. So this is where the struggle happens for them. And I remember realizing that I just didn't have any boundaries. I didn't communicate them. I walked all over other people's boundaries. I was late for people because people were late for me. And I was the victim in that situation. Yet I didn't take ownership over that. And I remember I was like, how do I actually work on this? Because I had a number of people saying, oh yeah, Ben, you haven't got any boundaries, or you're not good with time. You're not respectful around people's time. And I was like, I really wanted to be that leader who could hold a level of personal respect where if I said I was going to be there on time, I would be there on time, and there was a non-negotiable for me. 9 years later, I'm very much that person, but it took me work to get there. And this is what happened. I realized that I actually had very, very poor boundaries at every single level. First and foremost, I had no boundaries. People walked all over me. I didn't know what they were. If you would have asked me when I was 21 to 25, what's a boundary, I probably wouldn't even been able to tell you what it was. And then I realized that when I started to understand about boundaries, when I started doing things like on a couple of courses and a couple of things that would help educate me around boundary setting, that I had boundaries, but I didn't communicate them at all. So what they ended up becoming were landmines for the people around me. So I had an idea of what was okay and not okay, but didn't even communicate that. So people would walk all over my invisible lines all of the time. And the way I would respond to that was passive aggressive comments, shutting down, distancing myself, and being resentful instead of communicating effectively, kindly, and responsibly as a leader. So that was like level 1 boundaries, which actually was probably worse than level 0. Like level 0, have none, don't have them, people walk all over you. You probably don't even realize you're bottom of the pile. Level 1 is where you actually have them, but you don't communicate them. I was like, okay, I'm actually going to have to do the more conscious thing here of starting to communicate with my team what's okay and what's not okay, because clear is kind, being direct and open and challenging. And that's where I started to lead much, much better. But one of the things I was concerned and worried about, especially I led most of my team with my family. I had my brother, my cousin, I had Poppy's brother. I had people in like really close friends who worked for me in the gym. We felt like a family at some points. I know we weren't a family, but it felt really, really close. And we saw each other so frequently. But I was the leader. And I was worried that giving people consequence for stepping over things like lateness boundaries, time boundaries on meetings, the standards that we upheld around clients, the way we spoke to clients, payments, and all those things, if I didn't hold those well, the business would have been an absolute mess. So I realized the responsibility that I held in the company. So it was time to step up to level 3, have boundaries, communicate them, and enforce them. And this is where my life really started to change, because when you don't have that ability, things like people's cash flow issues, especially if you work with subcontractors. So for example, if a subcontractor wasn't managing their money effectively, so I had personal trainers in the gym, they were subcontracted at that point. If they weren't managing their finances properly, and I had 15 of those people not managing their finances effectively, what would happen is 15 headaches became my master headache. So this is where like even boundaries around payments on time, communications about payments, effective payment systems was so important. Because what happens is if you are working with multiple people and they don't pay on time, you have one big cash flow headache. And I've worked with so many businesses that have this problem, and it's a boundaries issue. Equally, you have emotional boundary issues where you actually allow people's problems to become your problems. People come and emotionally dump on you because they're in pain, you end up in pain. So this is where you actually, that ability to say, hey, this is okay and this is not okay, with family members, friends, relatives, customers. And it was actually really difficult because in any given day, I would probably see around about 6 to 10 clients come into my room and talk about the struggles and strains of weight loss. And some of these were really challenging conversations. People had cancer, people had illnesses, family members die, they had struggles at work. So there was a lot of problems being brought into my office on a daily basis, which I would have to try and stay buoyant around. So I had to have a boundary in place and a way to be able to not let those people problems become my problems. And that took practice, because one of the bigger things that actually did help me was getting a coach, having a therapist, and all that sort of stuff. And so especially if you're a consultant or a coach, you've got to have the mechanisms in place to keep your psychological wellness safe in those times. And then the third thing is, because I didn't have good quality boundaries, I didn't respect other people's boundaries. And when I really needed to make a good impression, when I really wanted to impress someone with the level of professionalism I had, that's when I often most let people down. And where I wouldn't show up on time, or I would cancel or change because of something else that was going on in my life, where perhaps even my boundaries weren't being respected. And that's where it hurt the most, because I felt it really damaged my reputation when I was showing up like that as a leader. So I realized that there was so much work that needed to be done. Now, one of the struggles I had, I was like, well, where do I even go to work on this stuff? Like, honestly, I couldn't find a place where someone could give me almost like a blueprint of what you need to do to work on your boundaries as a leader. And I couldn't find it. So what I did is I created it. I created the boss level boundary program. I was like, honestly, one of the best things I've always found is that when I'm learning something, the best way for me to learn it at its highest level is to create something that will allow me to teach it, but then hold myself to the standard at which I'm teaching it. So I created it and I delivered it on my program at the time, and I realized how much work I had to do. So this is where, first of all, you look at what level you're operating at. Like, are you level 0, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4? And what's the thing that you need to change in order to take it to the next level? Like, you could be that leader with 0 boundaries. Like, what do you need to do to take it to level 2 or 3? Equally, you could be someone who has boundaries, but you don't communicate them, you don't enforce them, or you don't recalibrate them. And it's like, what are the steps that need to happen for you to be able to do that? So what I found that was really helpful is that when I started learning that boundary conversations need to happen in every single arena, they need to happen in your emotional, in your private life, they need to happen with your kids, they need to happen with your clients and your customers and your team and your staff. I realized how effective those conversations could be. And that's why I said it's your superpower as a leader. Now, in November, one of the things that I'm doing with the Leaders Tribe is I'm having a focus on go for November. And if you want to start changing your relationship with no, which is a big part of boundary setting, where you say, this is what's okay, this is what's not okay, make a no a complete sentence where you're not having to justify your no's, and improving the way that you communicate your boundaries, click on the link in this video and come and find out more about it, because I can help you with your boundary setting. Because when you've got a blueprint of learning where you are on that level of being able to communicate and set boundaries and enforce them, it helps you with so much clarity as a leader. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you've enjoyed it, if it's been helpful, give it a like, give it a review if you've watched the video, and drop a comment about something that you're struggling with when it comes to your boundaries.